because we like to know who our visitors are today. How many first-year students, freshmen? Yay. Okay, sophomore students? Juniors? Seniors? Graduate students? Alumni? Alumni here? Yay. Okay, you chose to sit together? It's okay. We won't bite. Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for coming. We're so happy to see this wonderful turnout for what we hope is the first of many Museum Career Day events. My name is Wendy Marsoff. I'm the director of the Career Development Center. For those of you who haven't taken advantage of our different programs and services, there are some materials that you can get on the way out, and you're certainly welcome to come upstairs to the second floor, and we'll be glad to assist you with all of your career planning needs. We have a lot of other resources to take advantage of, but we're really most thrilled when we can present a wonderful group of professionals who can share their career stories as well as help connect you to the kinds of opportunities and options that are out there, and this time in the field of museums. I'd like to thank I'd like to thank Arts Management, Melissa Forstrom, who helped us launch this program, as well as Art History, graduate and undergraduate for their contributions to the program, and the History program where we have panelists today. So, without further ado, because I could keep on talking, I'm going to let Jessica introduce the panelists as well as the day of events. Thanks for coming.
So hello everyone, I'm only going to talk for a minute. So just to tell you a little bit about the format of the event. So what we're going to do here on the panel is that each panelist is going to talk for about 5 minutes to introduce themselves, to tell you about their career path, whether they have been working in the field for a number of years or whether they're a recent graduate, and maybe what they've been doing at Purchase from now to what they're doing now. Some may be sharing some of the opportunities and kind of educating you more about the place that they work at now as well. But different than some other panel presentations, instead of having a traditional Q&A after, the Q&A portion is going to be out there. As you probably came in, you saw tables and like a fair setup. So this is going to be your opportunity to talk to all or whomever you want to talk to who's on this panel, to ask your questions, to continue a conversation about their career and what they've done, to ask about where they're working, maybe learn about their opportunities, to really have this individual conversation or small group conversation, and to really give you the time to have this networking time, and to really, the main focus that we want to bring you is for you to be able to talk to the wonderful people here and get that time to do that. So without further ado, we're going to start off with the panelists. They're going to introduce themselves and tell you about themselves, and I'm going to start with Holly. Great.
Hi everyone, I'm Holly. I'm from the New Museum. Can everyone hear me, or should I grab a mic? No? Yes? Okay, great. So as I said, my name is Holly Harmon. I'm from the New Museum. My career path starts, as every young art historian's career path starts, with a military aptitude test. And so when I was in high school, I actually did not know what I wanted to do. I had no idea what kind of career I wanted to pursue. And so I did take a military aptitude test, which did not tell me what I had any aptitude for. But when I got the results, it did come with a booklet that you sort of fill out on your own. And then at the end, it gives you a career path. And it told me I should be a museum curator. And I was like, oh, that sounds really interesting. I think that is what I want to do. So as a high school junior, I decided I will study art history, I will get a PhD, I will become a museum curator. I'm not a museum curator, but I do work in a museum. So as I said, very early on, I sort of decided I was going to do this, and I just kind of went down the path that I learned online that I should go down in order to find this career. So I studied art history in undergrad. I also did a master's in art history at Syracuse University. And then after that is when the real fun starts and you get to do unpaid internships. And so I did a lot of unpaid internships. It was about 9 months, I think, between my graduate studies and getting my first job in a museum. So after I finished my graduate studies, I moved to Washington, D.C., where I had a job at the Hirshhorn. I say job, internship at the Hirshhorn. It was, again, unpaid. But in that position, it was called Interpretive Guides. I believe they still have the program, but what it was essentially walking around the galleries and engaging visitors, having conversations about art. And this really sparked in me a desire to shift over from sort of curatorial work to education, because I really became very passionate about sharing my experiences and sharing ideas about art with people. And so the Hirshhorn was really a great place to do that, because we were working in an Yves Klein exhibition. I don't know how many of you are familiar with that work, but the first room you walked into was just paintings that were completely blue. And so it is one of these like contemporary art experiences where people were like either loved it or hated it, didn't know what to make of it, and it was just great to be again talking about like, well, what do you think of when you look at the color blue? What comes to mind? What might this artist be trying to show us? What they might be trying to tell us through this work? And having those conversations really opened up doors for me. So from there, I interned at the National Museum of Women in the Arts. I also interned at the Corcoran. And then finally, I got a job at the Detroit Institute of Arts. And that was my first paid position working in interpretation. There, I focused on exhibitions. So we, as educators, were paired with curators, and we're doing exhibition planning from the beginning. So we would work together on the checklist, on what the show would look like, what the themes were, and together develop those things until the final installation and exhibition went up. So we were involved every step of the way. From there, I then later moved to the Brooklyn Museum, where I also worked in interpretation, focusing primarily on labels. So there I worked with the curators on labels, bringing a perspective of visitors and trying to make sure that the labels were more visitor-friendly, more accessible, and that the language worked for a general population rather than a kind of scholarly audience that I think the curators sometimes write for. From there, I am now at the New Museum, where I primarily manage our tour program. So moving from sort of behind the scenes, working on labels, to in front of the scenes, giving tours. I also train a group of volunteer docents to lead tours. I also work on our audio guides and am a bit of our accessibility coordinator. So it's a much smaller institution, so you have to wear a lot more hats, but it's a place that I really love, and I think if you aren't familiar with the New Museum, it is a contemporary art museum. We don't have a permanent collection, so every 3 to 4 months our exhibitions change. So I invite you to come if you haven't seen it, and hopefully we'll see you soon. That's it for me.
Hi, I'm gonna take the mic because I'm famous for not being heard. My name is Courtney Stewart. I'm a senior researcher in the Department for Islamic Art at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And unlike Holly, I did not know that art history was my destiny when I was in undergrad. I studied comparative literature, and I always knew that I loved museums, and I remember vividly, I was just thinking, this memory came to me a minute ago. When I was in my last year of undergrad, I was applying for graduate school to a museum studies program. And I contacted one of the professors at my undergrad and wanted to sit in on a class of museology. And the professor said no, I couldn't sit in on the class, and that also the program I was applying to was super competitive, and so I shouldn't get my hopes up. And that did not turn out the way that that person thought. I have gone on to this path. I did get accepted to that program. My graduate degrees are in museum studies first, and I was lucky to have some internships, and that led to a job after my museum studies degree. I then realized that I needed a bit more of an understanding of the art historical content, and I went back to school again, and I did another master's degree in art history, and I focused on Islamic art at that time. And for me, that was due mostly to having a really fantastic professor and mentor. And I think a lot of our choices are half chance sometimes. And if you meet the right person, they can really guide you to a subject that maybe you didn't even know that you would fall in love with. So keep your minds open as you move ahead with your career path. Through the graduate school program that I did art history in, I managed to find the job that I have now at the Met. And my role as a researcher has is actually pretty multifaceted. Part of it is academic, part of it is the research of the collection. I work on special exhibitions, I also work on our permanent collection. My personal interest is in Islamic jewelry from Spain to India. Particularly, I've been looking at Indian jewelry from the 17th century. I also do some collections management, so the museum studies program that I did actually has some very practical applications in my job day to day. And I interact a lot with the donors to the museum as well. I lead some of the, what we call travel with the Met tours, and I take museum patrons to countries like Morocco and Abu Dhabi, Dubai, Doha, Oman, are trips that I'll be leading next year, and it's a way for members of the museum to get specialized tours from museum staff while supporting the museum. So I do a billion different things, and I would be happy to talk to any of you about internships that we have at the Met and any questions that you have about going into this fantastic field of art history and museum work. Thanks.
Hi everyone, I am Leslie Wilson. I'm a professor here in art history, and I have a similar story of not sureness around studying art history. I definitely was a major in international relations, and not in art history in undergrad, but I took a few art history classes and studio art classes and became very interested in art history. I will be real with you when I say that part of the reason I waited until later was because I was a rower in college. So I worked out twice a day, and I woke up at 4:30 in the morning. And I took an astronomy class my first semester of undergrad that did not go well because I fell asleep every time that they turned out the lights to show pictures of the moon. So I was not sure that I could take art history because I was like, I know I'm interested in art, but I really don't know if I can stay awake for this in the dark. And so I waited, and then I discovered after I stopped rowing that I would have stayed awake no matter what because I thought it was riveting. And I had a really amazing professor. But then I went off to work actually for a couple years, first for the Department of Defense at the Africa Center for Strategic Studies, working on African security studies for a couple years, which was great because they paid me to travel to Africa for the work that we were doing, and that plays into my story later on. And then I spent 2 years doing that, but also wondering if I should be an art historian. And after 2 years in that role, I took an unpaid internship, my very first one, at the St. Louis Art Museum. I had spent some time living in St. Louis. I was a military kid, so I went to 4 high schools. St. Louis was one of those areas, and I really liked that museum. It was a great experience. That summer, I was paired with the curator of photography in the Department of Prints, Drawings, and Photographs, just because my writing sample had been on photo. And they were like, no one else talked about photo, and you seem like the person for this. And I loved it. And over the course of that summer, we met with each curator, walked through their section of their permanent collection, and they talked to us about how they developed it. They talked to us about their journey and their careers. We also looked at every single part of the institution, so we talked to development, we talked to marketing. And I was like, I would like to do this, but I also need to get paid and some health insurance because I broke a tooth that summer. I'm being totally honest. I broke a tooth that summer, and I managed to, playing volleyball, tear a ligament in my foot, and I was just like walking around in a boot without health insurance and trying to figure out what I wanted to do next. I took a position working for a management consulting firm for a couple years. So I was interested in the work that they've been doing with the Global Business Coalition on HIV/AIDS because my specialty was in global health. Did that for a couple years and contemplated applying for a PhD in art history, and then eventually did, and went off and pursued that. And that PhD brought a couple passions together for me: history of photography and work in African art and work in the African diaspora. while I was in grad school, I was an intern in the photo department at the Art Institute of Chicago for the better part of a year. And then when I was 29, so midway through the program, I took my last unpaid internship at the Contemporary Art Museum in St. Louis, which was a great experience because it's a non-collecting institution. And so to see how that functioned was great. I definitely did, though, pull my car over to the side of the road on my drive down to St. Louis when I realized I was about to be a 29-year-old unpaid intern. It hit me and I thought about it and I was like, if you had told me I was going to be an unpaid intern when I was 29, I would have slapped you in the mouth when I was like, why did I make these life choices? No. And I made a pact with myself at that point. No more unpaid internships. I'd done enough at that point so that it could be a real thing. But it's definitely, I think, a consistent story in our journey where, you are making a lot of sacrifices to get that experience, but also that experience becomes really invaluable. And so in my own work, I really like to bridge museum time and curatorial work with my work in the classroom and my own research. And teach classes here on museology and the like. So if you have any questions for me about any of that, especially surviving an unpaid internship, let me know. And then also Professor Elizabeth Guffey is here too, who's also in art history.
Yeah, I actually just am tagging along with Leslie because she has to actually go and teach a class on museums in a few minutes. But Leslie is actually also, you should say, in the process of creating our museum studies track within our Masters in Art History. I head the Masters in Art History program because we've seen that so many students actually cannot advance very far in their careers unless they have a master's degree at least, and I've been hearing that from you guys as well. So we have started this. Leslie has really been giving a lot of thought along with another faculty member, Jonah Westerman, and so I'm going to stick around because I'm happy to talk with you guys. Ivana here is also in the MA program as well. I will just say also, I'm not going to give you like a whole background of me, but one thing that we're really interested at Purchase is to create a museum studies program that has an emphasis as well on diversity and inclusiveness. And for me, what my area is really the inclusive museum, and that's something I am looking to start putting forward because I think it's really needed, especially for opening up museums in all kinds of different ways. So we actually have an interesting program which has that emphasis as well, and I think it's going to be an important thing in the future for more and more museums. Happy to talk with you guys later on about that.
And to let you know that the Graduate School Expo is going to be on the 14th, and art history will be represented as well as museum studies, so if you're interested in graduate work, you'll have lots of folks to talk to about that. Okay, thank you.
Hi guys, my name is Jim Dordeman. I work at the Maritime Aquarium in Norwalk. Probably like everybody here, when I was in high school, I did not really know what I wanted to do. I was really good at numbers, really good at math and money, so I decided to major in finance. So my first degree is actually in finance. When I graduated there, my boss at the drugstore I used to work at actually offered me a job the first day after I graduated because he really liked me. So I wound up managing a drugstore for about 5 or 6 years after I graduated. And while I enjoyed it, I was not really passionate about it, and I always liked animals, especially marine animals, so I actually decided to go back to school and get a biology degree. I live in southern Westchester, so the easiest way for me to get my foot in the door was to try to get a job at the Bronx Zoo while I was going to school. Since Neuberger Aquarium is quite far away, in Connecticut would have been quite a drive too. I basically left a full-time job, health benefits, all that. Went back to school, got a part-time job at the zoo, completed my biology degree. I wound up, while I was at the zoo, I worked at the Children's Zoo in the Camel Barn. I did not expect to fall in love with the camels, but I did. So I wound up being a camel trainer for, I worked at the zoo about 14 years. training camels, working in the children's zoo, domestic animals, all that stuff. While that was going on, I decided to volunteer at the aquarium just to kind of get my marine biology fixed out. In 2011, I decided to leave the zoo and try to join the education department at the aquarium, again as a part-time employee there. So I taught programs, did travel programs, in-house, speech programs, all that kind of stuff. The reason I was able to get the job in education was I had put in about 1,800 volunteer hours at the aquarium at that point. So while I don't have an education background, I learned enough just volunteering, doing tours as a volunteer, just interacting with the people on the floor. When I applied for the education position, I was actually able to get it, plus I have the science background to go with it too. A couple of years ago, I became full-time, so right now I am supervisor of floor programs. I supervise volunteers on the weekends. I coordinate internships, all unpaid. I do scout overnights sometimes. I do plenty of guided tours. So, you know, I started volunteering there in 2001, so I've actually been at the aquarium 17 years. I've only been on staff 7 years as paid. But I really know the whole aquarium. I interact with all the heads from all the departments, so I really have a good feel of the whole building at this point. And just a note about the aquariums and zoos, I know they're a little different than museums, but in a lot of ways, especially nowadays, they're similar in that we have to get the exhibits set up, not only for the comfort of the animals, but to make it presentable to people who want to see. And so, like, the people who do work in our exhibits department really have a big part in the success of the aquarium, getting everything set up, presentable, and just enjoyable for the public. So, so I do have kind of a weird career arc. I think one of the lessons from me is that just because you decide to major in something at the beginning, don't feel like you have to stay with that. Like if you feel like it's not going in the direction you want to, you can definitely switch paths. It is a sacrifice sometimes, but if you really find something you're passionate about, just follow it and it'll be good. So be happy to talk to anybody at the end, you know, especially about internships or even volunteering. I do a lot of work with both of them, so come by and see me.
So my name is Greg, and I actually graduated from Purchase with a master's degree in art history, and I completed that in 2008. In 2007, I actually started working at the Neuberger Museum as a grad student. And I originally started out in development. So for anybody who doesn't know what that is, it's essentially the fundraising arm of the museum. Spent 3 months in development, and then the summer was kind of wrapping up and the job was winding down, and the exhibitions department needed extra hands in turning over the lead gray exhibit. And I needed money. So I said, sure, I can do this. And that has started what has turned into a career for me. I worked at the Neuberger for 2 years before starting to branch out. I still work at the Neuberger, but I am a freelance museum installer. So I work with the New Museum, the Guggenheim, the Bruce Museum over in Connecticut, Neiman College. I've worked with the Clark Museum up in Massachusetts. I've worked at, there's a few other places in there somewhere. So it's been kind of a wild ride doing what I do. We basically are the people who get to interact with the art in a very hands-on capacity. And our primary function for our job is to protect all the objects so that the people who come after us can see these things in the same condition that we're able to appreciate. Exhibitions is a weird kind of conglomeration of skill sets, because you not only have to have a materials knowledge and a construction knowledge, you have to be kind of good at math, not terribly. But it does help a lot, because there's a lot of math involved in what we do. You have to have a sense of adventure, because you're always doing something that's a little on the side of weird. And the last thing is that it's good to just have background knowledge about what you're handling, who you're interacting with. I mean, we've interacted with artists of all ages. You know, I got to work with John Chamberlain like a week before he passed away. I got to work with Alex Katz, which is the show that's up at the Neuberger right now. Jeff Koons, Mauricio Catalan on a number of occasions. Danielle Tegeter, who was a Purchase alumni as well. So it's been kind of a rewarding experience. There's a lot of hard work that goes into what we do, but at the same time, when you step back from an installation and you kind of like turn it over to the rest of the museum, the curators and the education department and everybody else, and you get to start to see how the public interacts with all your hard work, it's a great sense of accomplishment. So if you guys have any questions about exhibitions or kind of the future trajectory of museum career paths, I'll be over at the Neuberger table, so come by, say hi, and whatever you want to know, I'll tell you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jen. I recently graduated Purchase in 2016, so super recent. I have a bachelor's in printmaking, and I work at the Stamford Museum in Nature Center as the curatorial assistant. I'm actually super fortunate, and I guess it's not that great of much of a good thing, but our department is super, super tiny, so I get to do everything from installing exhibitions, deinstalling, delivering artwork, picking up artwork, talking to artists, selling artwork, cataloging our collection, just everything. And also we have a working farm, which is really fun, so sometimes we have some animals in our exhibit. So yeah, so I did printmaking, and it gave me a lot of, exhibition handling, art handling skills, installing shows, and then also, just saying, yeah, I'll do it, and figuring out how to do it is always really helpful. And I had an internship while I was in school at IPCNY in Chelsea. That's the International Print Center of New York. And I also worked at the Stamford Museum part-time as like a gallery attendant on the weekends, because it's super close to here, and I need money for art supplies. But yeah, so do a little bit of everything, and it's great. So if you have any questions about the museum or anything, let me know. That's great.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Emma. I'm also a recent graduate. I graduated 2 years ago. I have my degree in art history and minors in history and Asian studies. Before graduating college, I tried to set myself up the best I could to get a job in the arts. I had an internship at the Neuberger Museum for a year and an internship at Q Art Gallery. I knew it was important to have professional references and good work experience. When I left Purchase, I felt confident that I'd be able to get a job in the arts. It took a year for that to happen. 2 weeks after graduation, I moved up from Brooklyn to Utica, New York. And the first 2 months in Utica were rough. I couldn't find a job anywhere. I applied to H&M, and they never got back to me. So So after H&M rejected me, I went to talk to a temp agency, and that was really helpful. They were able to help me get a job as a bookkeeper, and the skills I use as a bookkeeper are still skills that I use daily at the museum. It helped me become a better communicator, more confident on the phone, and more confident in general, because there's nothing scarier than dealing with other people's money and having them yell at you. So, and it also helped me become more detailed and organized. My advice to anyone struggling to get a job after college is be patient and keep learning new things. Another thing you can do is reach out to the Career Center here at Purchase. Before applying to my current job, that's what I did. They were really nice and helpful and went over my resume and cover letter with me, so I knew when I was going into my first interview that I set myself up the best I possibly could. Where I currently work is the Wellin Museum. It's a very small museum in Hamilton College. It has 8 full-time staff members, including myself. But there are many benefits to working at such a small institution. I get to do a lot of things that bigger institutions I wouldn't have been able to do. I work directly with the education and curatorial department. I work with artists, and I know what's going on at the museum at all times. I'm like the one who's supposed to know everything. So I know when art deliveries are coming, I know who's coming, are they important, are they not important? I also do typical office work, as well as coordinating travel, creating itineraries, organizing catering for every single event, and working on special projects. I truly love working at the Wellin. Everyone I work with is amazing and so smart. This is the best job I've ever had, and I'm incredibly grateful and excited to be doing the work I'm doing. If you have any questions for me, I'll be sitting somewhere on a table. Thank you.
Hello everyone, I'm Eileen Buchiri, and I am from Storm King Art Center, which is an outdoor sculpture museum, an open-air museum, if you will. We are located in Mountainville, which neighbors the town of Cornwall and New Windsor in Orange County. I've talked to a lot of people that have visited Storm King Art Center and have described it as kind of a hidden gem of the Hudson Valley. I also hear feedback all the time from people that haven't visited Storm King in the sense that I see the tip of that red sculpture right off the thruway, and every time I pass it I think to myself, what is that? And I need to go to Storm King Art Center. So that is the open invitation for you all to come visit the Art Center if you haven't already. Unlike many people on this panel, I am very new to the museum world. I started at Storm King Art Center in January as their first full-time in-house HR person, so I'm an HR generalist by title. And what that basically means is that I handle all of the HR administration for our organization in the sense of recruiting, onboarding, training and development, benefits administration, compliance. I oversee the employee handbook and enforcing policies and procedures. I play a significant role in performance management. And so that's just a small piece of what I do. So I do wear many hats on a daily basis. I have done a significant amount of hiring for Storm King Art Center, so don't discount those smaller, museums or smaller arts and culture nonprofit organizations, because a lot of times, kind of how you just said, you wear a lot of hats, you are exposed to many areas, and so that is a great way to kind of learn what you're good at and what you're not good at, what you like, what you don't like. And certainly, you can sometimes move quickly within an organization, or even, move cross-departmentally from one area to another. Even though we're a small organization, we are a traditional museum. We have an education department. There's 3 people there, and we have paid internships in our education department. We also have 3 people in curatorial, and I know for certain that I will be hiring a curatorial assistant in 2019 for anyone who may be job searching in the next few months. I have done a lot of hiring for our development or our fundraising arm of the organization. In layman's terms, we got to get the money in so we can build up our programs, build up our outreach. Our visitorship has quadrupled in the last 3 years. So I hire all types of positions. We have a significant seasonal staff, which is our visitor services attendants. That's the front line of the organization. We have about 45 to 50 seasonal staff between April and December when we're open to the public. And then we have 52, which I foresee in 2019 will be up to 55 regular employees. Most are full-time. We only have a couple of part-time opportunities. Most of our internships are paid. As I had mentioned before, we have education internships, marketing internships. We also have a new department, which is private events. And so they oversee our business and tourism groups. We do corporate business retreats. We also do weddings, which is new to us, which is a huge revenue generator. But because of our business, we're only capped to 6 weddings a year. But we have private events interns that work on that side of the house as well, anywhere between 1 to 2. So it's a really exciting time for Storm King. We're growing significantly in all of the areas within our organization. Hence, it's one of the reasons why I was brought on. And so I come from a very different background. I actually worked in human resources focusing on recruitment and training. In academia, I came from Marist College. And I found out about the opportunity at Storm King literally by chance. I happened to be recruiting for an HR assistant for my office at Marist. And of course, good practice is to see what's the competition out there. So I was looking at job boards to see what other HR opportunities were out there in the Orange County, Dutchess County area. And I happened to see the listing for Storm King. And my eyes kind of lit up because I grew up in Cornwall, which neighbors Storm King Art Center, so I was very familiar with the museum. I admittedly had not been at the museum since my high school days, and so it had been quite some time. And just learning more about the organization was really what piqued my interest. So I wasn't even job hunting. I literally threw my hat in the ring, and 3 interviews later, I got the job. And so I feel very fortunate to work for an organization that is progressive, that values their employees. We are unique in our own right as far as, yes, we're a museum, we also have an indoor gallery, but we're, our platform or our landscape is kind of a sculpture or a piece within itself. So it's very interesting to see everything come together in the way that Storm King has done so magically. And so I definitely am looking forward to speaking to the students. Come see me at the table and I can tell you more about Storm King and what we've been doing. And if you haven't visited Storm King Art Center, I really hope you will. Now is actually our peak time with the fall. What a beautiful backdrop to see our outdoor sculptures. We have about 100 sculptures ranging from small to large in our permanent collection. Our exhibition, which opened in April, will be open through November. And this particular exhibition, which is called Indicators, and it's centered around climate change, we really went outside the lines of our Storm King exhibition prototype or map, and we actually have 17 different pieces as part of our exhibition, which was really impressive considering we have 3 curatorial staff. And so with that being said, I certainly invite you and invite you to speak with me later today. So thank you for having me.
Hello, everyone. I'm Emily O'Leary. I graduated from Purchase in 2006, and currently I have been different titles, but currently I'm the associate curator at a small museum in the Bronx called the Derfner Judaica Museum and Art Collection at Hebrew Home at Riverdale. I've been there going on 13 years in the same position, which is sort of unusual, but I got really lucky. So I'll talk a little bit about how I ended up at Purchase in art history. I'm from Western New York, kind of in the middle of nowhere, in a town of 3,000 people, and I took 2 years off before I applied for college, and I had a full-time job in an office working with databases. So sort of a far cry. And I realized I wanted to do art history. So I came here knowing what I wanted to do, and I applied to the art history program. I double majored in literature. I had a minor in poli-sci for a short time, so I waffled a little bit, but I knew I wanted to be a curator, and that's what I wanted to do. So my senior year, I actually did a curatorial fellowship with the Neuberger, and I curated an exhibition at the Neuberger from their permanent collection. This would have been in '06, and I learned a lot about the practical process of hanging a show, and curating a show, and curating from the collection. While I was at Purchase, I was extremely involved. I pretty much did anything you could do at Purchase, from the student government to stuff in my department. I networked a lot. And when I graduated, I also was looking and trying to find a job anywhere in the city. I didn't really know how I was going to stay in the city because I was trying to find roommates and a place to live and all of that. So I'm looking for a job, and the first job that I got straight out of college, like May of '06 or whatever, I got headhunted by a temp agency through Monster, and I ended up working in an insurance company. And I called my dad every night crying about why did I go get my degree when I had the same job before I went to Purchase, only now I had student debt. So that was very, that was a little disheartening. But really how I got my job was that I got to know an alumnus here at Purchase while I was still here, who was in the Alumni Association, and because I was so involved. And she's a graphic designer, and she did work for a curator. She's a freelance graphic designer. She graduated in the '70s, so she's an older alumnus. And the curator of this very odd little museum up in the Northwest Bronx was looking for an assistant. And I ended up interviewing for the job. It was 3 days a week, so it was 21 hours a week. And I was up against one other candidate, but I got the job. And when I went into museum world, knowing I wanted to curate, knowing I wanted to work with art, I also sort of knew that I wanted to have some kind of social service or activist element to my work. I was not interested in the commercial art world. I'm also bad at selling things, so I was not interested in that side. So this particular place I interviewed, where I still work, is actually a very large campus that caters to senior adults, to older adults. So it's part nursing home, part other programs. It's a 32-acre campus. They have an art collection of 4,500 works of art by names like Andy Warhol, Diego Rivera, Ben Shahn. We have an outdoor sculpture garden. We have rotating exhibitions. So they have this really robust art program, but it's very much in the service of the community surrounding us and the community of older adults that we have living there at the Hebrew home. So it's a very unusual art space. So in the last 13 years, I also wear many hats. It's a very small museum. It's literally myself and the director, just the two of us. So we take care of a giant permanent collection that's spread throughout the entire facility, as well as curating exhibitions and all of that. So I do pretty much everything. I do marketing, I do social media, I do registrar work, which is inventorying and managing our database. I curate exhibitions, I write exhibition catalogs. I just designed my own exhibition catalog, which is at my table if anyone wants to talk to me after. I started as a curatorial assistant, was then promoted to an assistant curator, and then became associate curator 3 years ago. And in the museum world, usually those titles include a master's in between. I actually have not gone back for my master's, which is really unusual, I will say. But because I work full-time and I have health benefits, which was also a really important aspect of finding a job like this, I still have not gone back to get a master's degree. I don't know what everybody is looking to do for graduate work, but the program I plan on applying to is the MA, freestanding MA at Hunter, because you can do it part-time. So if you're working full-time, it's a very competitive program, but that's sort of my trajectory I'd like to do. But I've had the experience of learning from working with this collection, and it's a very eclectic collection. Through my research, I've sort of ended up with writing a lot about end of concentration in communist-era Eastern European art. And I have curated shows at the Slovak consulate. I've written exhibition catalog essays for museums in Russia. I've ended up sort of doing these things really through my job. I don't know how feasible that is today. You know, it's only 10 years ago, but I've really learned on the job, doing a lot of things. And my research area has sort of come through in that way. So I guess in terms of other stuff I do, I also freelance. I freelance curate. I think one of the most important things in my experience I can emphasize in terms of finding a job or even finding connections is networking. Networking as much as possible. Literally getting involved in whatever the local arts community is where you are. I'm very, very hooked into the Bronx arts community. I work with a lot of arts organizations. I know pretty much every arts organization in the Bronx. I'm currently freelancing as a collections consultant for a small organization focused on photography called Foco. I also am freelance curating a show in Hudson at the Hudson Opera Hall, and all of these are things that I have had the opportunity to do through meeting artists, meeting colleagues, joining associations, stuff like that. So that's been my trajectory, and I'm happy to talk to anyone about, I will say, I come from a middle class background, so when I said I wanted to be a curator, my parents were like, what does a curator do, my dad's a manufacturing engineer, and my mom had her own business, but they didn't know, so I kind of went to it by myself. And I do think there's also things to be said about how to supplement your income if you find a low-paid internship, or if you're trying to struggle to find a way to make your career happen. There's a lot of sort of things that you can fill in when you're doing that. So I'm happy to talk to anybody about what I did to sort of meet that end. And I think that's pretty much it. So Derfner, feel free.
Hello, everyone. It's great to see so many familiar faces here. I'm Laura Shimoleski, and I'm a professor of early American and Atlantic history here at SUNY Purchase. And to the gentleman from the Maritime Aquarium, I might well be the only person in the room who's actually slept on the floor of your institution with about 535,000 Girl Scouts, or so it felt.
We still do them.
But you folks do a fabulous job at kind of managing that population and making it be good fun for all. So anyway, I just wanted to do a shout out to that. I'm here because I also teach what's called public history, and that's closely related, really, a subfield of museum studies. So I'm representing the field of history, and as you've been learning from this panel discussion, there are many types of institutions that deal with historical material, exhibitry, and in the case of the places where I've worked, human history. So I have kind of a roundabout entree into the world of museums, and I'll tell it to you as quickly as I possibly can. It was the early 1990s. I had just left a PhD program in literature with a dissertation half done and thought, I just don't want to be doing this anymore. So I applied to a PhD program in history and got in, but could only work on it part-time. I had to do things like eat and sleep as well, so finding a job was critical, and I did as a grant writer for public television. It was winter time, and a colleague from across the hall came to me and said, "You're in graduate school in history, right?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "Well, a friend of mine works for a museum exhibit design firm, and he needs a researcher. Can you please post this at your graduate school," which was the Graduate Center of the City University of New York. And so I take it from her, I take the job posting, and I'm thinking, now I have a pile of Christmas bills, yay thick, as I usually do, and I'm not a big fan of winter, or wasn't at least back then. Here's what I'm going to do with this job posting. And the number said, "Call Herman Eberhardt at X number," which I did, and said Herman Eberhardt hired me over the phone, and then I went to work for about 15 hours a week during evenings at something I didn't even know existed, which was a museum exhibit design firm, which is a private company which gets contracts for reimagining and recreating museums. Some of these contracts are worth tens of millions of dollars and employ an army, not only of researchers, sometimes for a period of like 6 to 10 years, depending on the size of the project and its timeline, but also graphic designers, also digital designers, also gaming experts, because as we know, gaming can be is kind of integrated into the museum experience in the modern era. Architects, lighting designers, mount makers, just a plethora of people are involved in creating new museum experiences. The new Museum of African American History that opened in Washington, D.C. was not created by little elves behind the walls of the Smithsonian Museum. It was handed out to one of these firms, which is expert in this. They coordinate all the trades involved, and they bring these things to life. So it was really a dynamic 4 months. It only lasted 4 months because I quit the job so that I could date the Herman Eberhardt who was on the number for me to call, and yada, yada, yada. Next month, I will celebrate my 20th wedding anniversary to him. And it was our 12-year-old with whom I had to sleep on the floor of the Maritime Aquarium. So it all kind of came full circle in a very happy, personal way. We often talk about, wow, I never would have dated you now. like too much is happening culturally for that to ever have happened, but different times in the early 1990s. One of the other things that I wanted to call to mind is that just like there are many types of visitor experience with cultural and natural and historical property, there are many different types of history museums. There are historic house museums, which are immersive environments. There are things called living history museums where you go and milk a cow or churn some butter or play around on a spinning wheel, and everybody kind of loves those no matter what their ages are. And then there are dedicated history museums, which actually often don't have a ton of artifacts on exhibit, but tend to focus on the experience, the immersive experience of an historical period of time and really walk you through that. Some of the museums that I worked on were the National D-Day Museum, which is now the National World War II Museum, which is in New Orleans. I also worked on the Harry S. Truman Presidential Library, and my husband is now director of the museum at the Franklin Roosevelt Presidential Library, which I recommend everybody go to if you're interested in history experiences. It has just been redone. It was redone and reopened about 3 years ago, and it's really, really spectacular. Museums that are dedicated to history do safeguard a plethora of different types of objects requiring different types of care. So in one collection you can have ivory, which requires a certain type of storage, and then silk from the 1830s, which requires another type of storage. And people there specialize on knowing what light levels allow these things not to degrade when they're out in public view, and to be shown to their best advantage so that they're not destroyed and can still be seen for audiences for decades or hopefully centuries to come. That is also part of the history museum world, collections management and knowing the chemical molecular compositions of all of these objects and how they're cared for in the long term. And it's a really wonderful education in technology The entree point for many people is a museum studies degree, which one of my friends, who happens to work at the Lehman Gallery, Bart Glant, has called an MA in dusting. But that was just his little joke. It is so much more than that, and you would learn so much more than that in an MA Museum Studies program, especially if you were interested in the world of objects, and thinking of objects both as artifacts and as works of art and in displayable terms. A few things I want to say about history museums themselves. The jury's out as to whether this is a growth industry or not. We're not really sure what the history of these institutions will be. They often have very robust digital profiles, and that is because real-time visitor membership is down at a lot of these places. But then at others, it's up. And I think part of what keeps it up is those museums that can afford to be competitive with the other things that the world has to offer people with spare time. And those are the museums that are really seeing ticks in their visitorship. For example, there's a living history museum in Western Massachusetts, fabulous. It's called Old Sturbridge Village. It was on the verge of closing down about 12 years ago. But because they brought in some very insightful people who said we really have to assess our visitor experience, offer something to everyone, we can no longer have this attitude of if we build it and open the doors, they will come. They completely thought out of the box by instituting a children's historical play space, by allowing people to adopt personas from an app on their phone and kind of go through the site as an early American person versus a 21st century visitor. And these things, and all sorts of other public programs. What was it like to ice skate in the 19th century? Well, come get a pair of historical skates, skate on our lake, have some historical goodies, and hope that you don't break a leg. But if you do, we do a 21st century medicine nearby rather than 19th century medicine that might cut your leg off. No, just kidding. So anyway, all of those things really help to almost double their visitor experience. So people who are in school now can be riding the wave of how to improve and enhance and make visitor experiences in history museums. So I really consider you to think about it. It's so much more than just knowing the basic narrative of the past. And then I just wanted to say two more other quick things before I wrap up. Quick thing number one, it's a wonderful environment to work in. Museums are fantastic. And by the way, I was a project manager for the City of New York for one of its history museums for a number of years. I realized I left out my applied experience. But it's wonderful to be able to work around this stuff of the past, to be thinking about the stuff of the past. The salaries are often not robust. So sometimes that glamour and that charge that you get for being around the stuff of the past is the payoff. I will also say, though, museums, in the interest of raising their profile and raising funds, often throw great parties. In the process of my life in museums, I have partied with the likes of Bette Midler and Tom Hanks and Steven Spielberg and Hillary Clinton, because a museum that's going through some sort of big bang, high-profile renaissance really tends to attract broader interest and broader support. And that has been a real, I mean, they didn't know me from Adam, I should add, but anyway, it was just kind of thrilling to be in the same space with them and be enjoying the same event with them. So that's point number one. Point number two, if you go down the road of being a volunteer, do realize that many of these institutions are underfunded and understaffed. They need you to work. They will teach you things, but it would be really helpful if you brought things to the table. And certainly when you're interviewing for one of these jobs, don't emphasize what, I'll be historical and paraphrase JFK. It's not what, ask not what the institution can do for you. Tell the institution what you can do for them, and that I think would be infinitely better for your learning experience. Because they're going to be deputizing you to do things that they believe you're capable of doing, but you'll also know that you've done the good deed of helping to preserve our historical legacy as Americans. So I will be outside at a table as well, like everybody else. Thank you so much for your time, and enjoy the rest of this lovely event.
Margaret Adasco, and I'm the Curator of Education at the Katonah Museum of Art, which is about a half an hour north of here. It's a small, non-collecting art museum, so it's changing exhibitions. It also has around 8 to 10 staff at any given time, so a small place. And I've been there about 16 years now, so I kind of grew up there from assistant educator to coordinator, manager, and now the curator of education. And we have kind of 3 people in our education department. My background was in a combination of visual art and education and sociology. And I actually also never got my master's, just ended up in this job and stuck with it. And I feel also like I learned on the job and learned from some really great mentors along the way. I'm here today also because the Katonah Museum is always looking for great interns. Most of our internships are non-paid because we're so small, but we do have, we're looking for a museum education intern to carry us through this year, which is stipend paid. And we have 2 job openings, the communications manager and a curatorial associate. So I'd love to talk to people about those jobs. And, you know, I agree with what many of you have said. One of the things about a small museum is you do so much. There's so much overlap between the development department, the fundraising side of stuff, and the curatorial and the education. So I feel like there's so many skills needed to really succeed at this kind of job. And in a small environment, you're just constantly learning new things from all the great people you're working with.
Thank you.
I'll be able to
So our event is not over. An extremely important part is now. So if you will give a few minutes, if you guys want to kind of get to tables, you can go out, you can sneak out the back if you want. If you need to grab a drink, please, of course. And just give them a few minutes. And then this is an extremely important part. You are here to talk to them, to ask questions, or just to thank them for being here, or something sparked your interest that they said, or find out about their opportunities. So don't miss this opportunity to talk to everyone here. So we'll see you guys outside at the tables, okay?